The 2024-2025 NHL season is almost here. It's that time of the year where every fan base starts to get riled up thinking about how their favorite team will either ruin or make their year. So, whether you're a diehard fan or just watch enough to keep up and chirp your buddy's favorite team, this is what every NHL fan must know heading into the 2024-2025 season, East Edition. The Florida Panthers. The Cup champs stood on top of the hockey world for a reason. They are built with the perfect balance of speed, skill, and physicality. They won the Stanley Cup on an aggressive style that was backed by the game's most complete player in Alexander Barkov. Tactically in the offensive zone, the Panthers' D could be relentless along the walls because they frequently had support in the middle of the ice to cover if things go sideways. Now we're talking fundamentals here, but every Panther player did it so seamlessly and consistently that it felt like you were constantly running into Panther pressure, even if you beat your man. Despite the fact that they almost choked a 3-0 series lead in the Cup final, they avoided being the laughingstock by winning Game 7 and winning the Stanley Cup. Now, after all the celebrations and hangovers, the Panthers inevitably fall victim to the salary cap, losing important pieces like Ekman-Larsson, Brandon Montour, and Vladdy Tarasenko. But people said the same thing about them last year, and the Panthers still made it to back-to-back Cup finals. With how Paul Maurice gets every single player to buy in, expect all the new additions to fit in nicely, and for Florida to remain one of the top dogs in the East. The Boston Bruins. Boston is in a very interesting spot coming into the 24-25 season. For the last 2 seasons, goaltending has arguably been their biggest strength. But this season, they enter with that position being in complete limbo. Dealing Linus Ullmark to Ottawa at the beginning of the offseason has left Jeremy Swayman as the man for Boston's crease moving forward. Except, Swayman is an RFA without a contract, and after an ugly arbitration last season, Swayman has all the leverage and is showing no signs of budging on a potential deal. Now, it is possible by the time you see this video that Boston has figured something out, but it's got fans sweating just a little bit too much heading into the season. As for the rest of the team, though, Boston lost for the second year in a row to a more physical and complete Florida team. So, in response, Boston has built a D-core that's filled with a bunch of trees. The smallest D-man on this roster is Charlie McAvoy at 6'1", and every single one of them weighs over 200 pounds. With both Nikita Zadorov and Elias Lindholm leaving the Canucks to join Boston, Vancouver fans are sick to their stomach, especially knowing how well they're going to fit into that system. Like Florida, Boston is an aggressive team that gives its D-men permission to pinch on 50-50 pucks. Once they regain the pucks, they keep their forwards within the dots to provide support and play inside the dangerous areas of the ice. With a big smart D-man like Zadorov and a cerebral center like Lindholm, it's just more tools for Boston to execute their game plan. With their coaching and culture, I fully expect them to be a top dog in the East. But whether or not they have enough to get through the other top dogs is something I'm not so sure about. Then again, if Swayman gets hot at the right time, look out for the Bruins. The Toronto Maple Leafs. The Leafs lost in Game 7 of Round 1 to the Boston Bruins, again last season. Despite injury troubles and all the excuses, Leaf Nation saw a familiar story of their star players not showing up when it mattered most. Specifically, Mitch Marner, who has quickly fallen into the bad books of many Leaf fans. Surely, after another playoff failure, Toronto had to change something. So they fired their coach in Sheldon Keefe and brought in Craig Berube. Now, despite everyone expecting a bigger change like a potential Marner deal, the Leafs decide to make Austin Matthews the captain. For some, it's the right decision. For others, it's a glorified PR move to hook back every Leaf fan into the ride for this season. Now, despite all that, I actually do like the moves that Toronto made bringing in Chris Tanev and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Forget the term and the money, but from an on-ice perspective, Tanev is one of the best defensive defensemen in the league as he does so many little things like blocking shots or tying up sticks in front so damn well. This D-core is the best it's probably looked for the Leafs in the Matthews era. And with Berube now in Toronto, he's made it clear that he wants them to be a hard team to play against that relies on its structure instead of outscoring its problems. The irony is that the Leafs only scored more than 2 goals once in their series against Boston. Defensively, they held Boston in check when they had to, but they just couldn't score the clutch goal when they needed it most. Expect to see a more north-south style from the Leafs this season, and that could change how the core four generate offense. With them also running with Joseph Woll as their starting goalie, there's going to be some questions about whether or not he can carry the load while staying healthy. As always, the Leafs and their skill makes them a fascinating team every season. Look for the cup parade to be back on if the Leafs find a way to win their home opener. The Tampa Bay Lightning. If you want to talk about a franchise that royally pissed off their fans this summer, they decided to let their long-tenured captain and Steven Stamkos walk to free agency. Now, there are methods to Tampa's madness. Stamkos, who's 34, still scored 81 points in 79 games and was arguably Tampa's most impactful player in the playoffs, leading the team in goals. However, emotions are for chumps, and despite Stamkos being the heartbeat of the Lightning, Tampa made the decision to move on due to concerning trends with Stamkos' 5-on-5 offense. He had one 5-on-5 goal in November, and there was a stretch in December and January where he didn't even score at even strength. Combine that with a career worst -21, Tampa felt ready to move on and bring in Jake Guentzel as his replacement. Earlier in the summer, we covered exactly how this could impact Tampa's power play. There's no longer going to be the right-handed bomb in the left flank. The cross-ice feed to Stamkos from Kucherov will no longer be there, as well as the connecting one-timer play that Kucherov, Hedman, and Stamkos love to set up. Tampa fans shouldn't be too worried, though, because Guentzel will be a fantastic addition to this team off the rush, and he'll play really well off of guys like Kucherov and Point. Any player who's had extended success playing on Sidney Crosby's wing is probably more than capable of playing with other stars like Kucherov and Point. Aside from that big change, Tampa's biggest problem last year was their depth. Kucherov was a menace last season, leading the NHL with 144 points. But after that Tampa first line, the production really fell off. The way the top dogs will produce offense off the rush and on the power play will likely remain the same for Tampa. But Coach John Cooper's challenge will be finding a way to elicit more offense out of the bottom six to get this team to go deep once again. However, if playoff Vasilevsky finds a way to get hot, he should scare every man, woman, and child because he can easily win a series on his own. The Detroit Red Wings. This is a massive year for the so-called Yzerplan. Detroit is one of those teams in the Atlantic who everyone expects to take the leap and make the playoffs, but just keep falling short. Detroit last year couldn't have gotten any closer, and if it wasn't for Philly pulling their goalie in a tied game, Detroit's heroic comeback against the Habs would have actually meant something with them making the playoffs. But they didn't, so now it's back to the drawing board. Their top six will score goals, but it's defense and goaltending that should concern Detroit. The Red Wings ranked 24th in goals against per game and 26th in shots on goal against per game. Now, some of their issues can come from inexperience and making silly mistakes, and other issues came from below average goaltending at times. Regardless, if Detroit wants to take the next step, defense and goaltending is where they need to see the most improvement. Too often, they started poorly and had to come from behind to win. When they were streaking in January and February, they were doing it with hot shooting, hot goaltending, and special teams. Eventually, it caught up to them, and it led to them missing the playoffs. The Buffalo Sabres. The never-ending rebuild is finally looking to come to an end. Last year, I think a lot of fans had Buffalo ready to take the next step, and they fell flat on their face again. Last season, Buffalo just gave up way too many goals off the rush simply because of their passiveness on the forecheck and in the neutral zone that just gave teams way too much speed and spacing when entering the zone. Once the puck carrier entered the zone, Buffalo had no choice but to stick to the slot, and it led to a lot of high-danger chances against. Still, the Sabres D are young, mobile, and extremely skilled. Between Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, and Bowen Byram, Buffalo has the flexibility to create offense by using motion and getting defensive teams chasing. But with another year of disappointment, the Sabres did fire their coach, Don Granato, and brought in a familiar face in Lindy Ruff. Now, Buffalo is still the youngest team in hockey with an average age of 25.38 years old. So bringing in a veteran coach may be just what they need. But then again, Buffalo has been a circus of hirings, firings, and trades for years now. I mean, if you look at the Sabres roster from 2017 and 2018, that team was stacked with skill. Then, of course, they left Buffalo and found success. going into this season, the Sabres once again have a ton of young and flashy skill. But the question will remain whether or not they can actually put it all together to finally build somewhat of a winning team. With how good the Atlantic is, it's hard to see Buffalo finding a way to sneak in, but they do have the skill to cook up a little bit of a surprise. The Ottawa Senators. Take a shot anytime you hear a Sens fan rave about their team in September, and you'll be drunk for the rest of the season. I mean, seriously. This team always looks to improve on paper, and they also have all the tools for them to be good by now. Number 1 center, Tim Stützle. Power forward winger who has elite skill, Brady Tkachuk. Great depth. I mean, you got Giroux, Pinto Parlay, and Josh Norris. And then you have even Mobile D who can make plays in all 3 zones, and Shabbat, Zub, and Sanderson. The only thing missing is a goalie. Jonas Korpisalo was a goddamn disaster last year, putting up a 3.27 goals against and an .890 save percentage. The Sens immediately addressed that problem by acquiring former Vezina winner Linus Ullmark. Ullmark hopefully will give the Sens an extra save or 2 this season, but the Sens as a whole still need to improve both offensively and defensively if they want to be a playoff team. A full season with Jacques Martin as coach may help bring this team the structure it needs to have success. Or we could get another rodeo where the Sens are a dumpster fire by December. It's really up in the air, so we have to wait to see. The Montreal Canadiens. You can feel the hype in the air in Montreal. Playoffs are more than likely not in the cards, but with the young talent sprinkled throughout the lineup, everyone is excited to see another year of the development. First, it kicked off with the Habs drafting the dynamic Russian forward Ivan Demidov, lighting it up in Russia's junior league by scoring 60 points in 30 games. What stands out about him is his elite edge work, hands, and overall playmaking ability. Considering all the young talent that Demidov can potentially be playing with, Habs fans are really excited. However, Montreal's big move this offseason was bringing in Patrik Laine. Laine has obviously gone through some well-documented struggles both on and off the ice. But when he's confident and almost cocky in his skill set is when he's at his best. This season will likely be another year for some hard lessons for Montreal, but Martin St. Louis will likely let his young guns fly and use their creativity to create some offense. The rebuild is still going, but with all that skill, Montreal should be a very, very fun team to watch. One player to keep an eye out for the Calder will be Lane Hudson. The small but extremely shifty defenseman has flashes of Cale Makar-esque style, but putting it all together at the NHL level is going to be his next challenge. If you want to watch a team with exciting young talent, this is the team to look out for. But just don't count on them winning many games. The New York Rangers. The Rangers made it to the conference finals, but were eliminated by the eventual Cup champs and the Florida Panthers. The most notable issues were how their top dogs, Mika Zibanejad, Chris Kreider, and Artemi Panarin, got completely shut down in the series, combining for 1 goal. Going into this season, not much has changed on the personnel side for the Rangers, as they only added forward Riley Smith. Offensively, their power play will likely remain their deadliest weapon, as it's been a top 10 unit in the league for the last 3 seasons. It carried them through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs along with Igor Shesterkin. But if the Rangers truly want to win a cup, they need to be a way better team when 5-on-5. Despite all their talent, their advanced numbers had them in the bottom third of the league in 5-on-5 goals and 5-on-5 expected goals for. With minimal changes to the roster, Peter Laviolette will have to find ways to get his team to drive more offense in these situations. However, it will ultimately come down to the Stars and how they can create offense in the interior when the space shrinks in the playoffs. One thing's certain though, the Rangers better strike now, because when Shesterkin asks for that next contract, they are going to get rinsed. You can expect the Rangers to be one of the top teams in the East, and you can also expect Matt Rempe to find his way into some controversial hit or fight. The Carolina Hurricanes. The Hurricanes swung for the fences last season at the deadline by picking up Jake Guentzel and Evgeny Kuznetsov, but they struck out in the second round to the Rangers. For years, the team's man-on-man defense has been a staple to consistently being a top 10 team in the league. But now that there's been some turnover on the defensive side with guys like Pesce and Shea being replaced by Gostisbehere and Sean Walker, that alone may take some time for adjusting this season and could potentially impact Carolina's greatest strength. However, under Rod Brind'Amour, the Hurricanes' structure isn't really a concern. What's been the missing ingredient for years is that they've never truly had a game changer. Sebastian Aho and Jake Gensel were probably the closest thing, but it still wasn't enough to get them over the hump. Combine that with an older Frederik Andersen who's had an extensive history of injuries, many people are expecting a regression from Carolina. They may be right, but still expect the Hurricanes to be a solid playoff team who plays well in all three zones. The New York Islanders. The NHL's most boring team is once again looking like they're boring. Now that Lou Lamoriello will come and break my legs for saying that, we all know what type of style the New York Islanders want to play. Aside from Matthew Barzal, the Islanders just don't have top-end talent, and they didn't make any significant offseason changes to address that. But with a full season of Patrick Waugh, the Islanders can potentially get back to their winning ways using goaltending and a suffocating structure. When Waugh took over, the Islanders were giving up far fewer chances when 5-on-5. By being more aggressive in their 1-2-2 neutral zone and switching to a more hybrid style on their own end, the Islanders attached their checks far more frequently on the perimeter to take away time and space. Defensively, they got back to their game, but offensively, they're still a joke. Last season, they ranked in the bottom third in 5-on-5 goals for and 5-on-5 expected goals for. If they have success this season, it will largely come from the crease out. The Washington Capitals. Yes, the anomalies. There was no way that this team should have made the playoffs last season with a minus 36 goal differential. But because they were such a statistical anomaly, they found a way to get swept in the first round by the New York Rangers. Ovechkin looked awful in the playoff series, recording 0 points for the first time in his career. With the future looking a bit grim, the Caps actually went back in the lab and made some decent changes. They shored up their defense by adding Jacob Chychrun and Matt Roy, and they got some depth pieces in Andrew Mangiapane and Taylor Radish. But the biggest add and potential disaster is trading for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Everywhere Dubois has gone, there's been issues. Likely being the center for Ovi on his chase for Gretzky's record can be revitalizing for his game, or it can be the final nail in the coffin. As for Ovechkin himself, this man is in his beer league era. But who cares if he can still rip a piss missile from his office 20 to 30 times a season? Spencer Carberry did a fantastic job last season of designing Washington's play style to maximize what is left of Ovi's game. By allowing Ovi to hang out at the blue line while letting his other players carry the mail, Ovechkin is still able to use his offensive IQ and his timing to score goals. This season is still about the chase for Gretzky's goal record, but the Caps have made enough moves to still be competitive and potentially make the playoffs. The Pittsburgh Penguins. I'm surprised Sidney Crosby didn't have back surgery this summer after carrying the Penguins all of last season. Instead, he extended for another 2 years at $8.7 million, showing once again that he doesn't care at all about the money, but instead it's about loyalty and trying to win another Stanley Cup. Leaf fans are twitching watching Kyle Dubas sign a superstar who's willing to take less money. Now, despite Pittsburgh just missing the playoffs for the second year in a row, the Penguins were one of the hottest teams in the NHL down the stretch, but just ran out of time. A playoff style of hockey that saw them frequently leverage Crosby's strengths allowed Pittsburgh to be one of the most successful net front teams in the league when there's traffic. Combine that with the second line of Malkin, Bunting, and Raquel catching fire, they almost snuck into that last wildcard spot. This season, if they can get some consistent goaltending out of the gate and maintain that style of play, the Penguins may finally get back in the dance with Crosby. And they better hope they do, because they are wasting the final prime years of one of the all-time GOATs. The Philadelphia Flyers. Death, taxes, and John Tortorella giving us a quote for the ages.
I don't know cut from a hole in the wall.
Philly was going to make the playoffs last season, but some off-ice issues coupled with some negative momentum, and they basically had tumbled out of a spot right before the end of the season. Torts may have made some mistakes last season that he will admit, but this young Flyers team played solid structured hockey when they bought in. The most exciting part for Flyers fans is the debut of Matvei Michkov. Likely going to be the Calder favorite going into this season, Michkov can be the dynamic offensive piece that the Flyers have been missing. Often, good team defense in their own end or in the neutral zone would create a turnover and Philly would capitalize off the rush. Throw in a player of Michkov's creativity and offensive touch with these rush chances, and the Flyers' offense can become a whole new level of dangerous. That is if Torts decides not to get in the way and bench him for trying a Michigan. The New Jersey Devils. The Devils are everyone's trendy pick to get back in the playoffs this season. Last year was riddled by injuries and inconsistent goaltending, but this year with their additions, they brought in their new number one goalie in Jacob Markstrom. Adding some solid D-men in Brandon Dillon and Brett Pesce will certainly help them on the defensive side of the puck as well. But what I think their most important add is on the bench with Sheldon Keefe. Once Keefe got fired from Toronto and put out a video that looked like he went to heaven, New Jersey was quick to scoop him up. Sheldon Keefe has one of the best winning percentages of any current head coach in the NHL. But unable to have success in the playoffs, Toronto decided to get rid of him. In a situation where the media and the pressure is far less intense, I think Sheldon Keefe will be amazing with the weapons that New Jersey has. Similar to what he brought in Toronto, I would imagine that he's going to encourage his defense to be active and jump up in the play. Not just in the transition, but in the offensive zone as well. Toronto, with its most skilled players, typically used a lot of motion in the O-zone and it really freed up space for their best players to attack. With guys like Jack and Luke Hughes, fully expect Sheldon Keefe to maximize their skill and mobility in these areas of the game to unlock a whole other level of their offense. From a structure standpoint, we will really dive into the Devils this season, so keep an eye on the channel for that, but look for them to have a bounce back here. The Columbus Blue Jackets. With the terrible news that happened to Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau this summer, this organization and its fans are just hoping to see anything positive. It'll be a very challenging year in Columbus, not only because they're a young team in a rebuild, but because they will have to navigate through this season with this tragedy being at the forefront. Even though it's highly unlikely that they compete for a playoff spot, the entire hockey world would gladly welcome a miraculous feel-good story for the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Gaudreau in front, feeds a pass to Lindholm, stopped by Ottinger, took it up high, Gaudreau scores!